Okay, right, we're looking through Act 5 in key moments. We're going to speak to different groups about what's important. Act 5 is really important because it's going to cover all of these interpretations and there's going to be evidence for all of it. Sit down if you want to sit down. So be mindful of these contradictory interpretations. There's a lot that goes on in Act 5 that contradicts it. Put simply, you should be finding evidence for Prospero as God or Prospero as sinner. Put simply, you should see Prospero as good or bad. Okay, and there's evidence of both. And then you can see other interpretations as well. Right, let's start with the beginning of Act 5. Ariel has seen the effect of Prospero's magic, excessive magic. What do you find interesting, number one, about this exchange between Ariel and Prospero? Who's doing this one? Okay, over to you. Concise and fast. What would you say?
That when Ariel says your affections will become tender, it represents a shift in Prospero's mind as he's kind of considering maybe caring more for the young man, and kind of makes him realise the damage he's causing with his magic. And he kind of questions this when he says, dost thou think so, spirit? He's kind of starting to consider this kind of wanting to help others and kind of like the bad that his magic's doing.
And so he agrees to do what?
To give up his magic?
Yes, mine will, sir. And mine shall. And he makes him question, doesn't he? If I can learn humanity from a spirit, then I've got to get in touch with my own humanity. Is he fully gaining self-knowledge? Is he fully gaining self-knowledge? Yeah, would you say? I might argue he's not quite there yet. He's still obsessed with the wrongs done to him. What does he say? High wrongs I am struck to the quick. He thinks of other people's wrongs against him. But now he has to think, he has to battle with his nobler reason against his fury. So there's still conflict there. And he's battling against his desire for vengeance with virtue. This is a play of antithesis, sentences that have two opposing ideas. There's lots of antithesis at this point, because Prospero is battling against what his nature is and what he knows he should be. So I'm going to, what does he say is his sole purpose? And this is really important.
Bringing
the sole drift of my purpose, they being penitent. That's really important for the Christian interpretation. He wants to bring sinners to salvation. Only through being penitent can they be saved. Right? But what Prospero has yet to learn, and this is why I might say he's not gained full self-knowledge yet, is that he hasn't learned his own sins yet. He has to still think of himself as sinner. He's still thinking about what they've done to him and how angry he is. I'm stuck to the quick. Okay? Yet I must battle against my fury for virtue. I must battle against my vengeance in virtue. They being penitent. But he has to learn his own sins as well. And that's not yet quite there. So there's very much a Christian interpretation in this one here as well. Some people say that Ariel is a psychological part of Prospero. He's his super-ego, if you like, his conscience. And Caliban is his id. And they're both parts of him. And he's battling against one and the other. So you could see that Ariel is the conscience teaching Prospero. This is a play about conscience. What does Sebastian say to Antonio about his conscience? Yes. Antonio says, I do not have this deity in my bosom. This is a play about conscience and making people gain a conscience. The sole drift of my purpose. So Prospero is God here. He's trying to make sinners be saved, but yet to think about his own. Right, let's move on. Number 2, Prospero's soliloquy. You get a soliloquy in an exam. Don't see a soliloquy as one chunk. but rather there's parts of it. Okay, who's doing the soliloquy? What's the first part of it all about? Nice and loud, please, because otherwise it won't be picked up. Sorry? What's, from this section, what's it all about? Good. Unnatural is a good word to use. Unnatural power. Blasphemy, should you say. What's the most blasphemous thing Prospero has done? Good. What allusion does that remind you of? I have given fire. He's taking fire from God. What's that an allusion to? Prometheus. Remember, anyone aspiring to be a god must be punished for it. Prometheus is punished for giving godlike powers to humans. So allusion, that reference to other texts, I've given fire. Dr. Faustus trying to be a demigod. Anyone trying to be godlike must be punished for their pride. It's Lucifer, it's the archetype, isn't he? Satan trying to become God. Graves at my command, brought up like, it's the Last of Us. It says blasphemy, okay? Look at what I've done. He's in love with his power. Where does it change? Where do we see a change in a soliloquy? Remember, if you get soliloquy in an exam, you'll see other things. Yeah? Nanan?
He goes from describing his art, the rough, then really to describe things of battle as well. So now there's a change in how he used his magic, and then he actually says he's going to break it and drown it, and it's like a memorial, basically, of his magic.
Good. So it's always interesting how Prospero refers to magic in the play. When it's his own magic, it's my potent art, my powerful art. But when it's Sycorax, it's what? Witchcraft, black magic, nasty business, right? Devilish work. But when it's his own work, it's potent art. But is a conditional. That's the turning point, isn't it? But this rough magic, I hereby abjure. He's starting to gain self-knowledge. Okay, he's realizing I can't go down this blasphemous road anymore. What would you add to that?
We thought perhaps you could add maybe the references to the Tempest in scene 1 in the drama book and the roaring war.
Yeah.
Perhaps he says like a bit of a cyclical moment because he's sort of going back to the war, back to reflect on what he's done. I think as well, in the bit where he says he's went sleeping with their robes, he's separates his every third culture will be like so maybe his own mortality is making him reflect on things that he's
that's very good. This is a play about mortality as well. It's an old man thinking about his mortality, and every third thought shall be my death, and he's thinking about the afterlife. And so, yes, he's coming to that. Sometimes you get a question about the Tempest is about education, and Prospero must learn the error of his ways. So, we get lots of caesura, dashes. Why? Why are there lots of dashes? Oh, his verse is getting a bit dashy, a bit punctuated. Why? How does punctuation relate to meaning, Angie? Good. I'll drown my book, so the personification. We could kill it in a number of ways. Caliban says we shall burn his books. But Prospero says I'll drown my books. Why drown? Yeah? Oh yeah, that's a nice point. So it's cyclical, it's going back to the sea. And so going back to the sea. Yes, I'll drown my book. I don't think that's being implied, but rather there's something else perhaps to do with Christian sacraments. Yeah? Baptism. What is the point of baptism? What's the point of water in all world religions? The washing away of sin, so drowning books. Caliban says burn the books, but he's washed. So this idea of The sacrament of washing away sin. Lady Macbeth, all these hands ne'er be clean, she says, you know, a little water washes us of this deed, but it doesn't, does it? You know? So water plays an interesting part. To a Jacobean audience, it's a Christian sacrament, and so it's a sacrament of forgiveness. And so it's interesting that he uses that personification. Notice I'm using the language of poetry that you should be using for that. Okay, cool. I'll break my stuff. Right, let's move on. Forgiveness. Who's doing number 3? Talk to us about forgiveness. Who is forgiven? Yeah. So it's like a Christian perspective here. He's individually forgiven every. Sorry if I repeat you because it won't always be picked up, but carry on.
And the fact that he addresses the father first, sort of perhaps approach openness and the audience, not him.
Well, he addresses Alonso first, doesn't he? Most cruelly did thou, Alonso, use me and my daughter. Thy brother, who's his brother? Who's Alonso's brother? Sebastian, your brother was a furtherer in the act. So he forgives Gonzalo first. Sorry, yeah. Well, O good Gonzalo, true preserver, to him that follows I will pay thy graces. Grace is always a term that's often used. Grace is salvation. So Gonzalo is going to heaven. If you see God, Prospero is God, I shall pay thy graces. Amazing grace, how sweet thy sounds. Like the idea of salvation. Prospero it doesn't have to forgive Gonzalo. He's a good egg, right? Then he goes to Alonso. You and your brother did me wrong. But what does he say about Sebastian? He says to Sebastian, thou art pinched for it now, Sebastian. What's significant about that? Thou art pinched for it. What's he pinched with? Guilt. Yes. Do you not have that deity in your bosom? Prospero is made him feel guilty. What's the sole purpose of Prospero's drift, the sole drift of my purpose? We've already looked at it, right, in part 1. What is it? They being penitent. Sebastian penitent? Thou art pinched for it now, Sebastian. Yes, he is. Right. Okay, move on. But you, flesh and blood, he gets to his brother last. Why does he get to his brother last? Because this is the hardest one for him, I suppose, isn't it? What did you say about this? You, brother mine. What did you say about this? Antonio. That entertained ambition, expelled remorse and nature. What would you say about his crime? Oh, that's a good word. Hubristic. What does that mean? Yeah, so you've got to be punished for it, haven't you? Yes, of course it is. We've got to see Act 5 is loads of contradictions, and so it's hypocritical. It's too late in the day for me to spell right. There's a kind of irony in the words, isn't there? But does Prospero realise how ironic he is? You don't think so? He's not got that full self-knowledge yet, has he? It's totally hypocritical. Entertained ambition. What was Prospero's ambition? Yeah, exactly. He uses the word nature. You've expelled remorse and nature. Why is nature a word that's often used in Shakespeare? So you could quote it, brother unnatural though thou art. Why does he use nature all the time? Yeah?
It reflects Jacobean traditional social order, and as communists deal with the removal of social order at the beginning of in Act 1, Act 5 represents the return of order and nature. Very good. So the natural bonds that bind everyone together, the divine nature of kingship, the natural order has to be restored. Unnatural is always when someone does something out of the natural way of being, this fixed universe. So Macbeth killing the king does an unnatural act, doesn't it? Right. So you expelled nature. And this is a play about nature and nurture. Caliban is someone on whose nature nurture can never stick, says Prospero. Right.
Okay, what else would you forgive? Does he forgive him? Well, the evidence seems to suggest. What does he say? Yes, unnatural though they are. He can't not get it in though, can he? Unnatural. He can't not let him go. Their understanding begins to swell, and the approaching tide will fill the reasonable shore. What kind of poetic technique is that? Their understanding begins to ebb and begins to swell, and the approaching tide will fill the shore. What poetic technique is that? Yes, metaphor. But why? Why do we have that specific metaphor? What's it a metaphor of? The sea, right? Ebbs and tides. This is a play about the sea, right? So think about the parallels of why we have this kind of metaphor in relation to the play as a whole. Their understanding begins to swell. They don't yet know it's Prospero. You know, they don't yet know it's Prospero, but their understanding, like the tide, is rising. Right? Okay. What does he say at the end to Ariel? What makes this like a comedy? What do comedies do? Yes. They'll always try and get that in. Comedy. Always show the examiner you know what comedies do. Comedies are about, not ha-ha, but like about restoration of identity. So it's a little bit like Clark Kent. Right? No one knows he's Superman, but he takes off the glasses and all of a sudden, oh, it's Superman. Right? Give me my hat and my rapier. I will discase myself as Milan. I will reveal my true self to them. Okay? So it's about self-identity. Right? And of course, the metaphor for clothes, often a symbol of power. Macbeth says, why dress me in borrowed robes? Right. Move on. Revelation, restoration. Who's doing this one? Number 4. Okay, can you tell us what you find interesting in this section, please?
What Gonzalo said at the start of the contradiction, he said form of trouble, and then one of them is that you can't believe what's happened, and then you can't understand how it's going to live.
Where do you think he can't understand why he's been forgiven? He's done nothing wrong, Gonzalo, is he? Or are you talking about Alonso? Alonso, okay.
He says, I do think I resign, and then he also says about how many are wrong, but how successful are you in.
He says, Alonso says here, I do entreat thou pardon my wrongs. Entreat, I do ask of you that you pardon my wrongs. How does that make Prospero appear? I do ask thee to pardon my wrongs. It's like it's God, exactly, isn't it? So Alonso's starting to see Prospero as like God in that one. Okay? But, interestingly, Alonso doesn't know who he is, first of all. Whether thou beest he or no, whether you be Milan or some enchanted trifle. What's an enchanted trifle? A magical dessert? What is it? Are you human or are you spirit? Are you a devil? You know, an enchanted trifle? Are you a spirit? So again, another reference to Prospero as either a spirit or God. Contradictory. Shakespeare's always doing this in Act 5, so you should be able to see that. Okay? One little thing I'd say about that, Gonzalo, I always feel like how someone sees the island is a measure of their worth and their goodness. The good characters see the island well, and the bad characters see it's a horrible place, because they're bad, right? But Gonzalo, who's clearly a good character, describes the island as torment, trouble, wonder, and amazement. So it's not all even good to Gonzalo. Some heavenly power guide us out of this fearful country. Even Gonzalo is scared. And that suggests that Prospero's gone too far in his magic, too excessive. Remember what Ariel said about him. Your affections would become tender. Your charm so strongly works. If you're beheld them, your affections would become tender. Prospero must learn humanity from a spirit. He's gone too far. So we can be critical of Prospero. There's an argument that he's not entirely his good character. So on a simple level, is he good or bad? Both. And you should have evidence for that. Hopefully this is supplying it. Right. Blah, blah, blah. He just talks about, oh, embrace me now. And there's a lot of like Act 5 all about embrace. You don't need it. You just need to move to the important things. But what's the important thing when Antonio and Sebastian enter? The noblemen. What's the most interesting thing? Who's doing this? Is this your hand? Right. What's important about what Antonio and Sebastian say? What's your evidence that they haven't changed in their character? That's an interesting point. So even though they've been forgiven, they haven't changed in their character. What's your evidence for that? Who's he referring to? Yes, it's the devil speaks in him. This guy seems to know everything. The devil speaks in him. So again, this idea of Prospero as devil. But there is evidence that they haven't quite changed. Yes, we'll move on. What language technique is it that you, brother? So he's shown himself now as Prospero. To call brother would even infect my mouth. What's that? What language technique is that, Maria? What language technique is it though? I'm just thinking about in the extract question. Call you brother would infect my mouth. It's metaphor, isn't it? Okay, so think about how use of metaphor and language is used in the extract. Right. Okay, is that number 5 we're looking at? Is there anything more that you would talk about in that section, Maria or Romeo? What's significant about that? I suppose it's to do with the subject matter. It's still quite formal. He's passing judgment on them and passing sentence, even though he's forgiven them. But there's lots of hyperbole and rankest faults, okay, and lots of superlatives. All of them require my dukedom of thee, which perforce I know thou must restore. What's he asking at the end? Thou must restore. What's he asking, Romeo? Return of my dukedom. Restoration, the word restore. It's typical of Act 5. Yes, sorry, I didn't know you didn't get one. There's some around.
But when he's talking to Miranda, Prospero about what happened, he sort of admits that he was the cause for a bit of Antonio's betrayal. Like he said, I don't remember the quote, but he says like his neglecting of his duties will that cause Antonio to do things. Kind of interesting. He doesn't mention any of that in
Act 5. No, he doesn't. He mentions it. That's a really nice point. I don't know if it's got picked up. But the point was that Prospero to Miranda says that he was at fault in being wrapped in secret studies. But he doesn't mention his own fault in Act 5 when he's passing sentence. Again, Prospero isn't necessarily shining the mirror of sin on his own actions just yet. We get to that. But thou must restore kingdom again. Act 5 is about restoration of order, the natural order of things. Right, let's turn to... there's a number of things we could talk about. We come back to Miranda and Ferdinand playing chess. Maybe we can talk about feminist reading. There's also Christian reading there. If you look at it, look at all the words to do with Christian. resolution or reconciliation. Act 5 is about reconciliation. What words can you see that are specifically religious? Right? My sweet Lord. Miracle, merciful, blessings, goodly, which is close to godly. So if you get this in an extract exam, always look for patterns of words. What do you see, and why are they there? Who's doing number 6? What's symbolic about the chess game?
Well, it was like associated with aristocracy, upper classes, so shows like high status.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's good.
Also shows like.
It's their high status. It's a high status game. Yeah, aristocracy. Carry on.
Yeah, but I guess maybe it also kind of shows that Miranda and Ferdinand might have like an equal relationship because they're going against each other, but then that's underlined by their language because
Yes.
she says like he could play her false and she just like lets it happen. So it's kind of subservient to this.
Good. So chess is a game of strategy. In some ways, Prospero has been using everyone as pawns on the chessboard in order to gain ultimate victory, checkmate. And some of the comments we've had is also that there's a kind of parity or equality between them. They're both playing, Ferdinand and Miranda are both playing chess. But Miranda says in the language, oh, well, if you played me false, I would still call it fair play. Would you, how do females feel about her? Might a feminist reading be of that character at this point? If you played me false, I would call it fair play. What might a feminist reading take of that? Yeah. Have we lost the rebellious Miranda? Has she become passive again? Act 5 is about the restoration of order. What would you say about Miranda as a character?
Unlike earlier in the play in Act 3, Miranda says that she's hiding her bashful cunning and talks about how there's things that she wants to do but cannot speak about. Here she seems to be in a much more traditional gender role than she was earlier on.
That's interesting. So if restoration of order means that Miranda has to be restored to a female in a patriarchal world, she's becoming passive, she's lost her agency, that she's allowing herself to be subservient to Ferdinand. I agree to call it fair play. Should you even play me false? Seems a bit wrong. I'm going to argue against that because Shakespeare also contradicts that and allows you to have contradictory views of this play. That's why Act 5 is so important. Some feminists might argue that in a game of strategy, Miranda has won. She's commodified her own beauty. She's commodified her own virginity. She knows the currency of her virginity, the jewel in my dower, and she's got her man, right? And so she's won in this game of chess in many ways. And so you can see it perhaps in that sense. Equally, you can see it in the sense that she's been placed back into her passive box.
And I also think that is emphasised throughout the remainder of Act 5, where she speaks very little. She loses her voice.
She loses her voice, which is interesting. Right, well, let's take it to the end of the scene. What is interesting about what Miranda says? So she says, I've only ever seen one man other than Ferdinand, my father. She doesn't interestingly acknowledge Caliban as a man. She's seen him. And she says, wow, there's all these guys now. What goodly creatures. Goodly is a sort of connotation of godly. How beauteous mankind is. Oh, brave new world. Aldous Huxley obviously took that title for his dystopian nightmare vision of a world, Brave New World. What do we think of Miranda's declarations here, her exclamations? Beauteous mankind, brave new world. Nan, what do you say? Right, so maybe this seems rather naive. This girl is seeing these mankind's beauties, but maybe this play is showing us that they've been nothing such. Seems quite an ironic statement to make. The audience maybe have seen this world as not a beauteous world or a brave new world, yes?
Add to that she says noble creatures or something when she looks at the boat sink in the Tempest or something very similar language.
Yeah.
She's just not really learned anything. This practice is mostly about knowing, not knowing.
She's not learnt. She's not had a chance to see all these characters as well, but the audience have learned. Perhaps that there's a difference between what Miranda says and what the audience understand. A little bit like Mina at the end of Dracula. Oh, there's a smile on his face of of peace. Well, really? I don't see it, and that he's disappeared in the dust. He's smiling because he's won. Maybe this is a sequel, and he's coming back. So Shakespeare's playing on what characters say and what audiences understand, perhaps. Maybe there's a dramatic irony there we could talk about. We've seen what she hasn't seen, okay? And so you could talk about that. Which takes us to the subplot characters. Number 7. Don't be afraid to quote from stage directions. They come on in stolen apparel. Caliban says it's just but trash, luggage. Clothes maketh the man, and Shakespeare clothes are metaphors for power. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes, says Macbeth. Okay? Clothes are power, right? They've stolen the power from Prospero, so that's shown through their stage directions. Who's doing number 7? Okay, what would you talk about with this?
Well, obviously Caliban doesn't accept Prospero's authority, which is interesting because you could argue that he's the only one who doesn't actually receive proof of the person.
What's your evidence that he doesn't accept Prospero's authority in this section?
I don't know if I'm misreading it, but I feel like there's some sarcasm.
Sarcasm's difficult to detect. Why do you think it's sarcasm? That's interesting. I think you could see it in that way, couldn't you? And it's the exclamation marks. Could be a sign of sarcasm. Oh, these be brave spirits indeed. Brave New World. It sort of mirrors what Miranda said. Either he's naive or sarcastic. Okay? Or it depends on the interpretation. It depends on the way you play it on stage. Aimé Césaire, like the French Caribbean playwright, rewrote the play, the Tempest, in French from the perspective of Caliban. It's a completely different play in which Caliban escapes the island and escapes the tyranny of Prospero. We've seen in presentations of Caliban as defiant to the end, so it might fit with a Caliban being sarcastic. However, he does say how fine my master is. If we see it as sarcastic, we can also see it as actually subservient. He's being restored to his position. Is it out of love? How fine my master is. Does he recognize the true God? Or is it out of fear? I'm afraid he will chastise me. Leaders either lead through love or they lead through fear. Tyrants lead through fear. Okay, maybe you can see Prospero as God, how fine my master is, or the sarcasm of Caliban, or we see the tyrannical leader. What else would you say about what Sebastian and Antonio say about these subplot characters?
I mean, it just further proves that we haven't changed having emphasis on the monetary value.
Exactly, well done. So again, Caliban, when they see Caliban, they just see pound signs above his eyes. He's marketable. Someone in my class last lesson said, or the other lesson, they said that in a Marxist reading of a play, people are alienated from themselves, they're alienated from each other, and inequality leads to people being merely commodities, right? Miranda commodifies her own beauty and virginity and uses it as a currency. People look at Caliban and see something to be marketed. Okay, so it makes that post-colonial interpretation, that's instantly what they see. They don't see a man, they see something marketable. Will money buy them? Again, maybe that's a reference to the slavery post-colonial interpretation that you could look at. Prospero himself calls him a misshapen knave. Prospero is still othering Caliban. A knave can be a servant, or in Shakespearean it can also be a villain. The word is two synonyms, servant or villain. Prospero is seeing him what? A servant or villain here, do you think? Prospero, probably a villain. Okay. His mother was a witch and so strong. Look at all the things she did. That's exactly what Prospero did, but she's a witch and Prospero is potent art. Okay, final point over to you. What would you say?
At the end, he, acknowledges his own evil. It's his self-reflection that is interesting, and it's like it's like 2 lines long. Exclude others.
Very good. So this thing of darkness I must own as mine. You see that quote in a number of contradictory ways. Finally, Prospero is acknowledging his responsibility over Caliban. I must acknowledge mine. Post-colonial reading might acknowledge the possessive pronoun mine as a possession. This thing of darkness, again, otherness. You might also see this in a psychological reading. If we see Ariel as a part of Prospero, here he's acknowledging that Caliban, his anger, is a part of him too. So you can see that's a psychological reading in the post-colonial reading, or a sense of self-knowledge. All contradictory interpretations in the same quote. That's why Act 5 is very important. I think it's interesting he calls him a bastard, though. It's acknowledging it. I ain't his dad. He's saying, isn't he? Right, so which kind of contradicts what he's just said as well. So Shakespeare is interestingly cultivating a contradictory Act 5 that's not simplistic, and that's why it's an A-level text, and that's why I'm doing a tutorial on Act 5 so that you can navigate the essentially bringing it down to is he good or bad when he's both. Okay, you can support both of those arguments in different ways. Okay, sorry I interrupted you. What else would you add to this?
Going back to the film, I think Miranda's whole arc of being silent also links into his condemnation of cigarettes, and it's just nailing the hammer and condemning alpha women. Yeah,
that's a really nice point. So women are condemned in this play. Miranda is silenced in Act 5, the feminist reading, and in one of my other classes, somebody said that women are judged through the mouthpiece of males. I thought, oh, that's nice. Women are judged through the mouthpiece of males. And it's true, his mother was a witch. Again, if you did wide Sagasso C, you see it's trying to give a voice to the voiceless in the novel, the original novel, Jane Eyre, isn't it? We don't hear about Sycorax. I do believe someone told us, what did you say? Is there a film with Nicolas Cage?
Yeah,
about Renfield. So again, giving a voice to the voiceless Renfield might be interesting, right? Okay, let's move on. In the words of George Michael. Who's doing number 8? Is that your one? Right. I put here freedom question mark on this section. Can you elaborate?
So, interestingly, Alonso continues to dehumanize Caliban. He's still a strange thing.
He's dehumanized, he's othered by everyone in Act 5. He's a strange thing, Caliban, isn't he? Carry on.
Prospero continues saying that he was disproportioned in his manners and initiative. On the matter of freedom, Caliban does not receive the same freedom that Ariel explicitly receives at the end of the play. Prospero tells Ariel to the elements be free. He is, in a post-colonial reading, giving back his freedom, giving back his rights. And although he's referred to with the possessive pronouns my Ariel, and chip, which is animalistic and could be seen as dehumanization, it seems,
but in an affectionate way.
Yeah, it seems to be a term of endearment or affection in the context. In comparison, Caliban is told to go to my cell to have my pardon. So, although Prospero seems to have changed, he's given up his magic, he is still acting in a very godlike way. He's saying, I can give you penance, which Caliban says that he will seek to receive, seek for grace. And that he does conform back to the subservient role that he has been forced into. He also recognizes that Stefano has been false, drunkard. Alcohol within the play acts in a very similar way to the way that Prospero uses magic. It removes identity and allows characters to control others. And explicitly, Stefano is kind of linked to the idea that Prospero acts as God, because Caliban says that he mistook Stefano for a god and that he worshipped him.
Okay, thank you for that. So just in case it wasn't picked up by the mic then. So we see how Ariel is explicitly freed and Caliban is not. Caliban is given some notional freedom at some unspecified time. He said, as you seek to have my freedom, is not a declaration of freedom, whereas Ariel's is a declaration of freedom. Caliban himself doesn't see his future freedom as a certainty either. He says, I shall seek for grace. And he's not saying he knows he's going to get it. Even Caliban is acknowledging perhaps this day might not come. You know, but again, the seeking for grace is ending on an explicit seeking for salvation. Caliban says, I was wronged and a fool to worship a false god. Well, who else has worshipped a false god? Prospero has worshipped a false god of magic. Okay, so there's a kind of parallel there. You could almost, if you directed this play, you could almost have it that Caliban could almost be addressing Prospero there as well. What a thrice double ass I was to take this drunkard for a god. But there's no evidence of Prospero being a drunk. It's obviously Stefano. But the important thing is that Caliban is still treated as a slave. Goes to my cell, to my cave, and trim it handsomely, tidy it up, as you look to have mine. So he's still in the role of slave, and that's kind of important, okay? But the idea of worshipping a false god, maybe Caliban's realised that and he's gained self-knowledge. Right, let's move on. Final one, the epilogue. Now, I think there's a number of things we could talk about here. It's biographical in relation to Shakespeare, it's Christian, and you can see explicit Christian references in that extract. If you just highlighted them now, you would see prayers, bans, despair, prayer, crimes, indulgences, your good hands, pardon, lots of Christian ideas of sin and punishment and forgiveness. But let's consider it maybe from the position of proxemics. Remember, your coursework on Jerusalem applies to looking at the extract of the Tempest. How meaning is conveyed on stage through use of space. Prospero is alone on an empty stage. How does that make Prospero appear? Connie?
Like vulnerable.
Exactly, vulnerable. Powerlessness, powerless. Maybe the lighting changes. In Shakespeare's time, the lighting wouldn't be there, but certainly an empty stage and one person on it. He's talking directly to us. It's meta-theatre. Perhaps it's taken him out of the play. Maybe we see it as Shakespeare. You probably see also lots of examples of magic being referenced, charms overthrown, spells, mercy for religion. What could be more magical than creating a play? Creating a play, a pageant out of nothing. Okay? Yes?
It's quite interesting that we're trying to teach and also prevent, as in the death, prevent people the current times and their affairs, control arguments in justifying any means to make sure that ends meet, and in a sense when the advantage is magic with nothing at his disposal, he returns to what he always sort of has his charisma, so he compliments the audience, he flawlessly praises their mercy and whatnot, he appeals to it in this vulnerable stage, like you're saying. I felt more interesting is that, you know, like you're saying, in Act 5, he uses perhaps manipulation of the audience, bringing everything from his Christian, all these Christian concepts to this last moment where he has nothing but his humanity in terms of his corporate moment.
That's really nice. That's interesting. It's often been a question that the Tempest is a play about education, and so Mike probably didn't pick it up. This idea that Prospero is teaching the audience something at the end of this play, and perhaps he's teaching a Christian explicit message here at the end. You know, as you from your crimes would pardon be, let your indulgence set me free. Almost mimics kind of he is without sin cast the first stone. You know, the idea of sin being forgiven. He's trying to teach us, but maybe also we could see Prospero as being much more Machiavellian, trying to manipulate the audience for his own ends, which is what he's done in the play. In all the ways we see Prospero in the play, we can kind of see him like that in the epilogue as well. I agree. Yes, Nadine, what would you add?
You can say that this is about like kind of biographical reading, I think also Shakespeare, so there's a couple parallels. So Prospero as a character kind of questions his mortality because like every third thought that he has is about death. So
Where does he question his mortality? Sorry?
I mean, when he says like every third thought of mine, you just kind of assume that's about his mortality. It's not in here, but like earlier on.
Every third thought must be about my death. Yes, he's thinking about his mortality.
And then you can like also add that on the Shakespeare himself, because like how Prospero manipulates everyone on the island, Shakespeare manipulates characters that he creates and bots that he uses.
Yes.
So then like with Prospero addressing the audience, it can also be Shakespeare addressing the audience, asking for forgiveness, and also because that leads to the end of his career. Okay,
thanks for that. So that's we can see the biographical interpretation here. You know, the play 1613 it's one of his last plays. Okay, he's getting towards his end of his career. He's asking to be released from his career. He's thinking about his mortality, rather like Prospero's thinking every third thought about death. Okay, and we've got lots of references here to his project, whereas we know Prospero's project was to bring people to salvation. Here my project fails, which was to please. And gentle breath of your sails, yours my sails must fill. What is his project here, if it's Shakespeare? To entertain, exactly. Put your hands together. It can be for prayer to forgive me, but it can be for applause. So maybe this is Shakespeare. My project has been to entertain with gentle breath or cheers of yours and your hands together. Art to enchant. This is about theatre, perhaps. Yes.
Adds to that sort of magic and this blasphemy that towards the end of the very much last lines, he's been time pressure sort of onto the audience. There's last sort of thing that has to be happening.
Yeah, that's a nice point. Let's consider this couplet here. All of this is in rhyming couplets, a little bit like Ariel. speaks in rhyming couplets. Rhyming couplets have the sense of an incantation or a spell, as you put in the audience under its spell with these rhyming couplets. And in my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer. Well, despair is loss of faith in God. It's seen as the chief sin. Okay, it's the sin that Dr. Faustus, that other necromancer or magician, he doesn't believe in God's forgiveness. He has despair, and that's what punishes him ultimately in his tragedy. But here, maybe Prospero's despair is that the audience don't cheer. Maybe this is Shakespeare as well. So it can be both explicitly Christian, despair and prayer, or it can be biographical. And so mercy frees itself from all fault. So a play in which people are out for revenge ends on mercy. If it's a play about education, Prospero is teaching us about the nature of virtue rather than vengeance, but he's also teaching himself. And maybe only at the end of the play, in the epilogue, does Prospero even learn it about himself. And he's asking us to set him free. The power is with the audience, where throughout the play, the power is with Prospero. Okay. Right, that brings us to the end. Thank you for quite an intense tutorial. Thank you for your contributions. Didactic. A religious story, a parable. Right, let's see.